Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is episode 4. No, this is part 4 of LEMMiNO, The Enduring Mystery of Jack the Ripper. I'm going to knock out these. It's 20 minutes, but it's less than that because he does credits and all that stuff. So, my apologies. I got to let out a burp real fast. I feel much better. Yeah, rum and coke number 4. I'm just tired. I'm not wasted. I have a nice buzz though, I'll admit. See if I mixed it right. I know I didn't. I sure as hell did not mix it very well at all. Oh, I'm a failure. Oh. This one is going to be strong, boys and girls. Okay. Before we get started, though, I did want to just throw out terrible, sad news. I just found out that it's official. They're ruling Abraham Lincoln's death a suicide. Yeah. I was just as shocked as you were. They say that he shot himself in the back of the head and startled John Wilkes Booth, who was going to shoot him, and then freaked out and jumped over. So, yeah. It's breaking news that I've just created. So run with it. And let's see how far that gets. Shouldn't get far at all. Alright, so let's get into this. Suspect 1 was Cross. And I don't know how I felt about that one. I forgot the last name. I'd probably remember it had I not been drinking. LEMMiNO? I don't remember. And I'm too lazy to go back and look at my own videos. So let's just go ahead and get started with this one because it is 7:20 p.m. Papa wants to relax. Oh, it's a full drink.
Joseph Barnett was the man who lived with Mary Jane Kelly up until a few days before the murder. He and Kelly had supposedly met around April of 1887, and they eventually moved to 13 Miller's Court. Barnett was employed as a fish porter, but for reasons unknown, he lost his job between July and August of 1888. From that point onwards, the couple struggled to pay rent, and Kelly resorted back to prostitution. Now, those who believe that
if you're watching these videos, is this building still up? I could totally check, but have you done the Whitechapel thing? Because I would love to go to England and do the Whitechapel tour. Let me rephrase that. I would love to go to England and visit relatives and do the Whitechapel tour. That's how you're supposed to say it, right? Yeah, that's what I meant.
Barnett was the Ripper view his loss of employment as a turning point. The argument is that Barnett was so overcome with guilt and anguish for driving Kelly back to prostitution that he went on a murder spree, murdering one local prostitute after another in a desperate attempt to frighten Kelly off the streets.
Yeah,
while most of this is pure speculation, it is true that Barnett disapproved of Kelly's prostitution. You may recall that Barnett separated from Kelly on October the 30th because he disliked the prostitutes with whom she associated.
But that's not going to make someone murder.
Kelly never went on the streets when she lived with me. She would never have gone wrong again, and I should never have left if it had not been for the prostitutes stopping by the house.
This might further explain why Kelly was the Ripper's final and most viciously mutilated victim. The implication being that Barnett felt rejected by Kelly and wanted revenge for the breakup. According to Barnett, he did...
If you're going to link Barnett to any of them, then you would link him to her. And with how brutal this murder is, I could see it not really being a Ripper murder, and with how savage it was, being more of a crime of passion. But this guy doesn't... He just doesn't do it for me.
Pay Kelly a visit on the evening of November the 8th, where they had parted on, quote,
friendly terms.
He then supposedly went home, played a card game until 12:30 before going to bed. Now, Kelly is presumed to have died in the early hours of November the 9th, so Barnett could have returned to Miller's Court sometime after midnight. While the police did subject him to 4 hours of interrogation, Barnett was ultimately released without charge. Then there's the matter of the locked door. When the police arrived at Miller's Court, they had to force the door open with a pickaxe. This raised an important question. How did the killer lock the door behind him? According to Barnett, the key to room 13 had been missing for some time. Because of this, he and Kelly would, quote,
open the door by reaching through the broken window.
The door
That's
was
not
said to be
safe.
equipped with a, quote,
Catch lock.
and evidently locked itself upon being closed. If that's true, mystery solved. But even if the door was not self-locking, there's still an obvious solution. All the killer would have had to do is observe Kelly using the window trick and then employ that same technique to fasten the door upon leaving. But those who favor Barnett as the Ripper offer yet another solution. The key never went missing. Instead, Barnett is said to have stolen the key and then used it on the night of the murder. These solutions are all equally valid, and it's impossible to know which one is correct. There is a slight variation of this theory which states that Barnett did murder Kelly, but was not the Ripper. Instead, he merely emulated the Ripper to deflect attention away from himself.
Holy
Once
shit.
again, this is...
That's what I just said. And it being a crime of passion, but emulated the Ripper, okay. But it was too savage. Then again, the Ripper didn't kill anyone indoors like he did here. So he had more time to be savage if that was what he wanted. But I'm just... If that guy is the Ripper, or if him being a suspect to me makes me not believe that she is a Ripper murder victim. With just how brutal it was, it's more of a crime of passion. I'm gonna quit talking.
Pure speculation, but the murder of Kelly did somewhat differ from the rest in that it was committed indoors.
I just said that!
Barnett remained in the East End until his death in 1926 at the age of 68.
I apologize for yelling.
While it's only natural for suspicion to fall upon witnesses and acquaintances, Victorian detectives did pursue other lines of inquiry. One prominent theory was that the Ripper suffered from insanity, and a prime suspect in that category is Aaron Kosminski. The Whitechapel murders investigation.
I'm so fat.
Brendan, you're not fat. It's the shirt.
Look at Nate. His true classic is tight around the chest and shoulders and arms, and then it tapers off towards the bottom.
Nate also has six-pack abs.
Thanks, man.
The Whitechapel murders investigation was overseen by numerous high-ranking officers within the Metropolitan Police. One of them was Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson. Upon his retirement, Anderson repeatedly and unequivocally stated that Jack the Ripper had been identified.
There was no doubt whatever as to the identity of the criminal.
Really?
Without disclosing the name of the suspect, Anderson described him as a, quote,
low-class Polish Jew
who was, quote,
safely caged in an asylum.
He'd been identified by a witness who was described as, quote,
the only person who ever had a good view of the murderer.
This unnamed witness had supposedly refused to testify because the suspect was, quote,
a fellow Jew.
Anyone ever know about this? I've never heard anything about this. But then again, I've been drinking and I probably forgot. Now I kind of wish I was sober for this. I'm not drunk.
I'm almost tempted to disclose the identity of the murderer,
Yes, do
but
it.
no public benefit would result from such a course.
While
Why would no public benefit? Yeah, it would. Look, if you know who it is and they're locked away in an asylum, and maybe I agree with him. If he is locked in an asylum and you publicly say this person did it and they're locked up in an asylum, you know people are getting pitchforks and torches and they are marching to that asylum like the Old West, you know, for a great example in America. Had to burp. Man, I want another pickle. Hot damn, them some good pickles. I apologize. My nephew. I'm on Snapchat now. I'm cool with like the kids. You can look me up, by the way. I'm Kris Stanton. Kris. Yeah, Stanton. Look me up. We'll talk. We'll chat. We'll chit chat. I'll put it on my thing description. Majig. What was I saying? This is what happens when you drink during videos. Oh. So if he were to put the name out, a mob would go to this asylum and would, you know, we want the person because you know they're gonna kill him. And if the asylum doesn't give him up, which the asylum shouldn't, they're gonna get a hold of the police. The mob is probably gonna burn the asylum down. They'll just kill everyone. So I understand what he's saying there. I get it. The alternative is you can arrest him, go through the trial. We'll start the trial process. I'm hoping it works this way in England. I do apologize. I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm not a scholar in anything except pickles. I love pickles. And I can make a pretty good rum and coke after 4 tries. So they could have got the guy to declare insanity, lock him up in an asylum for the rest of his life, and I think then maybe the public would have been more comfortable because we got him. He was insane. He's locked away. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, no, he's insane. He's in an insane asylum. It's fine. Well, you want that justice played out. Does any of that make sense? It's really making sense in my mind. I'm just hoping I haven't been drinking too much. God damn, I want a pickle. 15 minutes. Can I wait 15 minutes for a pickle? God damn, I ain't waiting 15 minutes for no pickles. I'll be back. I'm sorry. I needed them. So this is what I have. Kosher dill deli style spears. I know Greg, you had made a comment. It's so good. And I use it as an excuse because it's hot. My nephew is blowing up my Snapchat. What are you doing, boy? Was I done with what I was saying? I don't even remember what I was saying. I think the point of what I was saying was arrest him, charge him, and then throw him in an insane asylum. Don't just pawn it off as he's in an insane asylum, it's fine. Because that's just... But, reading at the bottom, 1910, if he's dead... Well, see, if he's dead, it's kind of inappropriate to slander the guy. But at the same time, the public does have a right to know. I'm going to get on with the video so I can get back to drinking and eat a pickle.
Anderson never revealed the name of the suspect. His colleagues were a bit more forthcoming.
Oh.
Chief Inspector Donald Swanson revealed that his surname was Kosminski. Yet another high-ranking officer, Melville McNaughton, described Kosminski as a homicidal and misogynistic resident of Whitechapel. Surviving records show that an Aaron Kosminski was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1891. Aaron was indeed from Poland, he was Jewish, and had lived in Whitechapel. He suffered from auditory hallucinations and a paranoid fear of being fed by others. He was trained as a barber, but had, quote, not...
He refuses food from others because he is told to do so, and he eats out of the gutter for the same reason? Wow. Sorry. My dogs might need to get through. You want to come through? Come on. Come on. There you go. Okay, back to the video.
Attempted any kind of work for years.
It's unclear when his mental health began to decline, but upon being institutionalized, Aaron was deemed to be harmless. He was, quote, quiet and well-behaved, and, quote, apathetic as a rule. Only on rare occasions would he get, quote, excited and violent.
Okay, so this is 1891. That Sir Cop guy said that in 1910. So you're talking 19 years past. If this guy gets released back onto the street, then yeah, for the public good, you need to arrest him, you need to charge him, you need to do something.
However, before his confinement, Aaron had once threatened his sister with a knife. The case against him largely hinges upon the claims made by Anderson, Swanson, and McNaughton, especially the claim that an unnamed witness identified a suspect named Kosminski.
I'm an asshole. What if they were lying? What if the information the police were going by was off of false witnesses? Oh, I'm a drunkard. I'm not drunk, I apologize, but I'm kind of working this shit out in my brain as I'm going along. I'm sorry.
But the descriptions of that suspect are not entirely consistent with Aaron Kosminski. For instance, McNaughton stated that the suspect had been, quote, removed to a lunatic asylum about March 1889. Aaron was first confined in 1891. Swanson wrote that the suspect had been, quote, sent to the asylum and died shortly afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Aaron was still alive at the time and spent nearly 3 decades in psychiatric care. As such...
Okay. So, maybe this suspect, Kosminski, is who that one cop was talking about. And let's say that guy died. We'll say he died in 1890. That cop is giving the talk in 1910. And he probably figures it's been 20 years. It doesn't matter. But he didn't say he was dead. So maybe he was thinking it was Kosminski. The Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski. And the guy was still alive. And that's why he didn't give the name up. Because he didn't want them going there with pitchforks. I apologize. I'm just going through this and you guys are going along on this, and I apologize if this is bothering you.
It is possible that the suspect Kosminski was someone other than Aaron Kosminski. It's also possible that these inconsistencies were mere lapses in memory. After all, these events were recounted years or even decades after the fact, and McNaughton even confessed to writing solely from memory. Regardless of the suspect's true identity, Anderson was the only one who seemed convinced of his guilt. McNaughton ultimately favored a different suspect and stated that, quote,
"Many homicidal maniacs were suspected, but no shadow of proof could be thrown on any one."
Inspector Edmund Reed was of the same opinion.
"Now we have Sir Robert Anderson saying that Jack the Ripper was a Jew. That I challenge him to prove. I challenge anyone to prove that there was a tittle of evidence against man, woman, or child."
So when Anderson wrote...
Okay, so I took Anderson's word that there wasn't a doubt, and apparently he's the only one who seems to have went public with his information, and the other two seem to be like, no. I think they're confident to say no with his opinion, as it was completely 100% we know who it was. Man, you're never going to solve this.
"No doubt whatever as to the identity of the criminal."
He merely expressed his personal opinion. There was in fact ample doubt, and...
Oh shit, that was 1920, and I kept saying 1910. You know what, though? I will say this, and I am so sorry, people. As time goes on, and you get further away from incidents, there are things where, let's see, 88, you're talking 32 years later, he made this comment. I'm 42 years old, 19. And so if I'm 42, there are comments that I could say, things in my life that happened at the age of 10, that I would be confident about. And I could talk to my dad and my sisters, and they would probably tell me I was full of shit. That did not happen. I'm so far removed from that incident that my mind has just, and everyone's mind does it, you start piecing things together to make that into whatever it was. So, man, I'm an idiot. Sorry.
No consensus amongst the police. But in recent years, Aaron Kosminski has been resurrected as a prime suspect due to a controversial DNA analysis. Okay, so back in 1888, acting Sergeant Amos Simpson is said to have stolen a blood-stained shawl from the...
He looks like he's wearing a mask.
...crime scene of Catherine Eddowes. This shawl was then passed down from one generation to the next before being submitted for DNA testing in 2011.
My father heard this story. I apologize for all the pausing, ladies and gentlemen. It's because of the drinking, so I become talkative. I'm a talky little bitch when I get drinking. My dad heard the story, passed it along to me, and was like, Jack the Ripper's been solved. And I was like, And he's like, no, it has been. It has been because of this. And I'm like, But, you know, my dad hears it, so it has to be true.
DNA samples were extracted from the shawl and then compared against maternal descendants of Eddowes and Kosminski. In both cases, it was a match. If the subsequent news coverage is to be believed, the mystery has now been, quote,
definitively solved.
Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. But as you can imagine, it's never quite that simple. First of all, the provenance or chain of custody of the shawl is severely lacking. There is no evidence of a shawl being found at the crime scene, nor is there any evidence of Simpson ever being at the crime scene. Furthermore, a destitute woman like Eddowes is unlikely to have owned such an expensive item. Second of all, the type of DNA used to identify Eddowes and Kosminski was mitochondrial DNA.
The powerhouse of the cell.
This type of DNA is passed down through the female line and is not unique to any one individual. Thousands can share the same mitochondrial DNA, which means it can't be used to pinpoint a specific person. In the words of a geneticist,
based on mitochondrial DNA, one can only exclude a suspect.
So to say that the mystery has been definitively solved is widely inaccurate. There's still plenty of room for doubt. So, to recap, a suspect named Kosminski was identified by an unknown witness. This was enough to convince at least one senior officer of his guilt. That suspect may have been Aaron Kosminski, a man who was largely non-violent but once threatened his sister with a knife. Aaron can neither be incriminated nor eliminated by the DNA evidence. He spent the rest of his life in psychiatric care and died in 1919 at the age of 53. Kosminski was not the only suspect advanced by a high-ranking officer. A completely different suspect who still falls into the same category is Francis Tumblety.
What a dope mustache.
2 days before the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, an American physician named Francis Tumblety was arrested in London. As you can probably tell from this photograph, Tumblety was quite an eccentric character. He was born in Ireland around 1833, but was raised in the United States. From an early age, Tumblety gained a reputation for being a medicaster or quack doctor. He engaged in all sorts of medically dubious practices and advertised himself as the Indian herb doctor. He promised to cure anything from dyspepsia and scurvy to cancer and blindness using nothing but medicinal herbs. When he was not posing as a doctor, Tumblety was busy running from the law. He was either accused or convicted for crimes like theft and assault, attempt to induce a miscarriage, and manslaughter of a patient. He was even implicated in the assassination of US President Abraham Lincoln, but was ultimately cleared of suspicion. Now, in the early 18th...
That's a bunch of bullshit. Abraham Lincoln was a suicide. We've already discussed this.
60s, Tumblety is alleged to have hosted a lavish dinner party in Washington. Only men were invited to this dinner, and Tumblety had supposedly expressed fierce hatred of women. Furthermore, he showcased a cabinet in his office in which he stored a vast collection of jars filled with anatomical specimens, some of which were said to contain the wombs of, quote,
every class of woman.
In 1869, Tumblety ventured across the Atlantic and visited England for the first time. By his own admission, he roamed the streets of London until he became familiar with every part of it. He advertised himself as the great American doctor.
I love watching the smoke plumes, how they move and everything like that. I like the
and had a few skirmishes with the police. After a few more voyages between the old world and the new, Tumblety found himself in London in the autumn of 1888. The purpose of his visit and whereabouts at the time of the murders are completely unknown. Tumblety never stayed in one place for long and made frequent use of false names. There is a story of a mysterious lodger leaving behind a blood-stained shirt near the murder site of Elizabeth Stride. This supposedly happened on the night of the murder, and some believe that this lodger was Francis Tumblety. But there is no firm evidence of that, and the entire incident is fraught with uncertainty. What we do know is that Tumblety was arrested in London on November the 7th. According to the press, as well as Tumblety himself, he was arrested on suspicion of being Jack the Ripper. 2 days later, Mary Jane Kelly was found brutally murdered.
Dr. Tumblety, a queer character well known in New Orleans. What a headline. Can you imagine that headline today? Oh, the booze. It's just been a fun day.
And it's unclear whether Tumblety was still in custody or had already been released on bail. Nevertheless, he was ultimately charged with 4 counts of gross indecency, which had nothing to do with the murders. But Tumblety had no intention of standing trial. Instead, he made his way across the English Channel, boarded a steamship under a false name, and fled back to America. He was pursued by detectives and kept under surveillance, but his offenses were, quote,
not extraditable.
As such, Tumblety remained in the United States and never returned to England.
So then they must not have ever gotten real proof or reason to link him to the murder, because it's not extraditable. Murder is extraditable, I would guess. I would say America and England have had our differences in the past, but I'm pretty sure if America had the guy Jack the Ripper and England said that, America would be more than happy to catch him and turn him over. Because they would be like, look what we did. We caught Jack the Ripper. Well, we told you Jack the Ripper was there. No, we caught him. We caught him. We did our own investigation and we sent him back to you. Because that's some shit that America would do. That's what America would say.
So to recap, Francis Tumblety was a misogynistic medicaster who was in London at the time of the murders. He even showcased a collection of wombs.
I mean, a mustache like that, I would say you probably have murdered at least one person in your life, but I just don't see him as the Ripper.
And the Ripper did indeed extract the womb from 2 of his victims. I mean, he sounds like the perfect suspect.
No.
Perhaps a bit too perfect. There is no doubt that Tumblety was in London in 1888, but the claim that he was a misogynistic collector of human body parts is extremely dubious.
Yeah.
It can be traced back to a single article from December of 1888, featuring an interview with a man named Charles Dunham. Dunham had a long history of spreading misinformation and has been described as a pathological liar, a forger, and a conman. He was even convicted of perjury. As such, there is every reason to believe that this story is a complete fabrication.
Yeah.
Furthermore, Tumblety was both older and taller than the men described by most witnesses. Tumblety was said to be, quote,
an enormous man
who liked to dress in flamboyant and militaristic outfits. It's difficult to imagine a tall, pompous American sneaking around the streets of Whitechapel virtually undetected. On the other hand, it's unclear which, if any, of the witness accounts can be trusted.
I have a question. Did Americans back in the 1880s, did we still carry that British speak? Anyone in America kind of knows what I mean. Were we back in the 1700s, and I would say maybe early 1800s, I'm sure it changed by the time Lincoln had come around. We were kind of just we were speaking our own language, our own version, American English. We weren't, talking with the accent or trying to be British and trying to pretend like we were gentlemen or something special about us. So I would guess that he would have to have put on an accent and had been fantastic. Otherwise, he's going to stick out. And no one mentioned anything about, and that's why I bring it up, no one mentioned anything about the way he spoke being slightly different or maybe fake compared to what a normal British person would speak. Not saying he couldn't have perfected it, but I'm just saying.
Then there's the matter of the rings. You may recall that 2 brass rings were stolen from the body of Annie Chapman. It's suspected that the rings were taken by the Ripper to be kept as trophies. Now, upon his death in 1903, Tumblety left behind a quite impressive estate. But among his many valuable possessions were a pair of inexpensive imitation rings. Could they have been the same rings taken from the body of Chapman? It's possible.
Maybe.
It's also impossible to prove. Chief Inspector John Littlechild regarded Tumblety as a, quote, very likely suspect. And it's not difficult to see why. If the many rumors about him are to be believed, Tumblety had both opportunity and motive to commit the murders. But therein lies the problem. Much of what we know about Tumblety is founded upon unsubstantiated rumors. Tumblety himself was an attention-seeking charlatan with no qualms about lies and deception. With a suspect like that, one can never be certain where the lies end and the truth begins.
Yeah. I'm just not buying him.
To theorize about the identity of Jack the Ripper is to navigate a minefield of hearsay, sophistry, and contradictions. Entire encyclopedias have been dedicated to the compilation of suspects, and with every passing year, they seem to grow ever more expansive. Even though there are hundreds of potential suspects, only a dozen or so are worth more than a brief consideration. Some of the more sensational contenders include famous authors and artists, as well as high-ranking officers and members of the royal family. But these grand conspiracies and elaborate deceptions seem hopelessly contrived against the sheer simplicity of a suspect like Charles Lechmere, an unassuming delivery man on his way to work. Personally, I remain unconvinced that Jack the Ripper has even been identified as a suspect. The few covered in this video are probable candidates, but it's still possible to make persuasive arguments against them.
Yeah.
The same is true of all those left out by necessity. None of them can offer anything more than ambiguity and circumstance. With a suspect pool in the hundreds, that might seem improbable. But London was the largest city in the world, home to the largest port in the world. It was a city of millions, with a large population of poorly documented drifters. It's not difficult to imagine one lowly sailor, butcher, medic, soldier, barber, merchant, porter, clerk, blending into the slums of Whitechapel like a grain of sand.
Very well possible that the person who did it, wow, I'm all over the place. They could have been a suspect, could have been interviewed, may not have been. And it's one of those things we'll never know. I'm sticking to my, they lived outside of that area. And maybe they walked to work. Oh, sorry. Maybe they walked to work and they had to walk through there. And that's what I'm thinking. They lived a few miles away, and they worked a few miles away. And so this section of town was no different. To them, maybe they treated it as just a town that they walked 2 miles to get to, and then they walked through it, and then they walked another 2 or 3 miles to get to their job. And to them it was just a section where there was debauchery and prostitutes and all this other stuff. But we'll never know. We will never know. There will never be a definitive answer. It doesn't matter how much research you do, you'll never have an answer. Because if you have an answer, somebody will have, hold on a second, this is why this person couldn't have done it. No one will ever agree on one suspect. And it's crazy, and it's sad that it'll never, justice will never be done for those families. And by justice will never be done, I just mean the outing of the person, to where it kind of gives closure to the people who died. Yeah, it's sad in a way. I never thought about it when I was younger, how sad it is. These people died and the killer got away. Well, enough of the pity party. I apologize for all the stops in this one. But I've had a lot of rum and cokes. You probably see it in my eyes. My eyes are good. My face has gotten red. I'm going to sit back for a second. This is a good video. I'm glad I did it. It was also mentioned to me yesterday that this was probably LEMMiNO's best video, and I was wanting to do it, and I'm glad I Jack the Ripper's just a fascinating character. I would love to do a video on H.H. Holmes, that scumbag. Alright, look, I appreciate you watching, enjoying the video. We're going to end this here. We're going to shut this down in 100.